Every morning, millions of Americans heat up vegetable oil in a pan. They pour it over a skillet, watch it shimmer, and feel good about it, because that's what they were told to do. Switch from butter, ditch the lard, use the heart-healthy oil. And so they did, faithfully, for decades. But here's the question almost nobody is asking. What actually happens to that oil the moment it hits a hot pan? Because the oil sitting in that bottle on your counter and the oil sizzling at high heat are not the same substance. And the difference between those two things may be quietly affecting the one organ you can't afford to ignore. If content like this matters to you, hit subscribe right now. We cover this kind of thing every week. Think about a man named Richard. 68 years old, retired school teacher from Ohio, never smoked, walked 3 miles every morning, watched his diet carefully for 30 years. When the low-fat guidelines came out in the 80s, he followed them. He switched from butter to vegetable oil, from whole milk to skim, from eggs to egg whites. He read the labels. He bought the products that said "heart healthy" on the front. He did everything right. Or at least, everything he had been told was right. Then one afternoon, after a routine physical, his cardiologist sat across from him and delivered news that didn't make any sense. Arterial plaque, elevated triglycerides, markers of chronic vascular inflammation. Richard looked at the doctor and said, almost confused, "But I've been so careful." And the doctor paused and said something Richard had never heard before. "The problem wasn't just your cholesterol, Richard. It was silent inflammation, and it's been building for a long time." That conversation stayed with Richard. And honestly, when I heard about situations like his, and I have more times than I can count over the years, it stayed with me too. Because Richard hadn't been reckless. He hadn't been lazy. He had been doing exactly what the mainstream nutritional advice told him to do. And yet, something had gone wrong. Slowly, invisibly, in the background of an otherwise careful life. So the real question isn't whether Richard made bad choices. The real question is, what was actually happening inside his arteries all those years while he cooked with the oil he thought was protecting him? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to be clear from the start. This isn't about demonizing a single food. It's not about panic. It's about understanding a biological process that most people have never had explained to them clearly. Because once you understand what happens to certain vegetable oils when they're heated, really understand it at the molecular level, in plain language, you'll never look at your kitchen the same way again. Here's where most people's thinking goes wrong. They assume the danger in cooking oil is about fat content. Too much fat, bad for the heart. Less fat, better for the heart. That's the model most of us grew up with. But that model is incomplete. And in some cases, it's precisely backward. The real issue with certain vegetable oils isn't the fat itself. It's what happens to the fat molecules when they're exposed to high heat. And that process has a name: lipid oxidation. Imagine your cooking oil as a structure built from long, flexible chains, like a rope. When that rope is cold and undisturbed, it holds its shape. It's stable. But when you apply intense heat, those chains begin to unravel. They break apart at weak points. And as they break, they release fragments. Unstable, reactive molecules that weren't there before. Those fragments don't just disappear. They get absorbed into the food you're cooking. And then they enter your body. And once they're inside you, they behave very differently from the intact fat molecules you started with. The problem is especially pronounced with oils that are high in polyunsaturated fatty acids. Oils like soybean, sunflower, corn, and standard refined canola. These oils have a molecular structure that makes them particularly vulnerable to heat, the very thing that makes them liquid at room temperature. That flexibility in their molecular chains is the same thing that makes them unstable under high temperatures. They oxidize faster, they break down more readily, and they produce more of the harmful byproducts that researchers have been paying close attention to for the past several decades. One of those byproducts is a compound called 4-hydroxynonenal. You don't need to remember that name, but you do need to understand what it does. Think of it as a corrosive fragment, a piece of broken chain that's now chemically active and looking to bind to something. When researchers at the University of Oxford, led by Dr. Martin Grootveld, studied what happened to polyunsaturated oils during normal home cooking, they found that heating these oils produced aldehydes, toxic compounds, at levels that in some cases exceeded safe daily exposure limits recommended by health organizations. These weren't exotic laboratory conditions. This was regular pan frying, the kind of cooking that happens in millions of American kitchens every single morning. And here is the part that makes this so much harder to recognize. Your heart doesn't send you a signal when this is happening. There's no pain, no warning light, no obvious symptom in the early stages. Your arteries can be accumulating damage quietly for years, sometimes decades, before anything shows up on a test. That silence is not reassuring. That silence is exactly what makes this so important to understand. I want to pause here for a second, because I know what some of you might be thinking. You've been cooking with vegetable oil your whole adult life. You feel fine. Maybe your numbers have been okay. And I understand that. I really do. But here's what I've seen over many years of following this research. The damage from oxidized lipids doesn't announce itself early. It accumulates. It's a slow process. It's the kind of thing that looks fine on the surface for a long time, and then doesn't. The connection between oxidized fats and cardiovascular disease runs through something most people have heard of, but few really understand. LDL cholesterol. The conventional story about LDL is that high levels are dangerous, and that's not entirely wrong. But the more precise story, the one that researchers like Dr. Daniel Steinberg spent decades documenting, is that it's not LDL itself that initiates arterial damage. It's oxidized LDL. There's a meaningful difference. When LDL particles circulate in the bloodstream in their normal state, they're relatively benign. But when they become oxidized, when they've been chemically altered by reactive compounds, they become aggressive. They trigger an immune response inside the arterial wall. The body treats oxidized LDL the way it treats a foreign invader. It sends white blood cells to attack it. And that immune response, repeated day after day, year after year, is what creates the chronic inflammation that damages the endothelium, the delicate inner lining of your arteries. Picture the inside of a healthy artery as a smooth, flexible tube. Blood moves through it cleanly. The walls are slippery, almost frictionless. But when oxidized compounds begin irritating the endothelial lining repeatedly, like sandpaper running across the same spot again and again, tiny injuries form. The body tries to heal them. Inflammatory cells gather at the site. Plaque begins to build slowly inside the wall. And because this process is happening deep inside the arterial structure, entirely below the level of any sensation, most people don't know it's occurring. Dr. Peter Libby, one of the leading researchers in cardiovascular inflammation, has described chronic low-grade arterial inflammation as one of the central mechanisms of heart disease. Not a side effect, not a secondary concern, but a primary driver of the disease process itself. I want to stop here for a moment, because what I just described, this entire chain of events, is the kind of thing that usually doesn't get explained this clearly. You hear, eat less fat. You hear, watch your cholesterol. But the actual mechanism, the reason why what you heat in your pan every morning might matter more than you think, rarely gets laid out this simply. And that's exactly why I keep coming back to this topic. Because people deserve to actually understand what's happening in their own bodies, not just follow a rule without knowing why the rule exists. Here's something that makes this even more important. And honestly, it's the part that surprises people most when I bring it up. What happens to oil when you reuse it? In most American households, people cook with the same bottle of vegetable oil over the course of weeks or months. Each time that oil is heated, even if it's not used to full smoking point, the oxidation process advances a little further. The oil that's been heated 5 times is not the same oil as the oil that was heated once. Researchers Yunok Cho and David Min, in their comprehensive review of lipid oxidation during frying, documented how reheated oils develop progressively higher concentrations of oxidation products, peroxides, aldehydes, and other reactive compounds with each successive heating cycle. The oil degrades, and it degrades in a direction that's not neutral for your cardiovascular system. There's something almost counterintuitive about this whole picture, and I think it's worth naming directly. The shift toward vegetable oils, away from butter, lard, and animal fats, was promoted for decades as a cardiovascular health measure. The reasoning made sense on the surface. Saturated fats raise LDL. High LDL correlates with heart disease, therefore replacing saturated fats with polyunsaturated vegetable oils should help. And in some contexts that reasoning has merit, but it contains a critical blind spot. Polyunsaturated fats are chemically fragile under heat in a way that saturated fats are not. A saturated fat molecule, by its very structure, is resistant to oxidation. Its bonds are stable. Butter, lard, coconut oil. These fats hold their chemical structure at cooking temperatures far more reliably than soybean or sunflower oil. This doesn't mean you should eat them in unlimited quantities. It means the full picture is more complicated than a simple saturated bad, unsaturated good story ever acknowledged. Before I go further, I want to say this clearly. If you've been watching this video and feeling like the ground has shifted a little under your feet, that's okay. That's actually a healthy response. It means you're thinking about something you may not have had to think about carefully before. And this isn't a reason to be afraid, it's a reason to be more precise, more thoughtful, to make decisions based on the full reality of what you're putting in your body, rather than a slogan on a label. Now, not all vegetable oils behave the same way under heat, and this distinction matters enormously. The stability of a cooking oil under heat is largely determined by its fatty acid composition and its natural antioxidant content. Oils high in polyunsaturated fats, soybean, sunflower, corn, standard canola, are the most thermally unstable. Oils high in monounsaturated fats, like extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil, are considerably more stable. Oils that are predominantly saturated, butter, ghee, coconut oil, are the most heat-stable of all. This doesn't mean olive oil is infinitely safe at all temperatures, or that butter is a superfood. What it means is that the choice of oil for high heat cooking has real biochemical implications, and those implications are not the same for every oil. If you've been following everything carefully today, and you're starting to see why this information, the full picture, not just the simple version, can make a real difference in how you protect your cardiovascular health over the long term, I want to take a moment to mention something. What we've covered today is one layer of a much larger system. The relationship between diet, inflammation, and heart health involves your sleep, your stress response, your gut microbiome, your exercise patterns, and how all of those things interact with each other daily. There's a complete protocol that addresses all of those layers together, not just the cooking oil piece. You can find it through the link in the description and the pinned comment below, or scan the QR code you see on screen right now. If you're someone who takes their cardiovascular health seriously, it's worth looking at today. So what does a more thoughtful approach to cooking oil actually look like in practice? It starts with matching the oil to the cooking method. For high heat cooking, searing, stir-frying, anything above medium-high, the oils that hold up best are those with higher heat stability. Avocado oil, ghee, coconut oil, or even a small amount of butter. Extra virgin olive oil is excellent for low to medium heat and extraordinary as a finishing oil or in dressings where it isn't heated at all. For baking at moderate temperatures, it performs reasonably well. The issue arises when highly polyunsaturated oils, your standard vegetable oil blends, sunflower, corn oil, are used for the kind of sustained high heat frying that pushes them well past their stable temperature range. The second practical shift is even simpler. Don't reuse oil for repeated frying. Each heating cycle degrades the oil further. If you cook with oil at high temperatures, use fresh oil each time. It sounds like a small thing, Over years of daily cooking, it isn't small at all. And third, pay attention to smoke. When an oil starts to smoke, it's telling you something. Smoke means the oil has reached its degradation point. It's breaking down. The compounds being released into the air around your pan and into your food at that moment are not neutral. Stepping back from the point of smoke isn't just about flavor, it's about what's happening chemically in real time. I want to be honest with you about something, and I think it matters. None of these changes will undo decades of accumulated habits overnight. The body doesn't work that way, and I'd never suggest otherwise. What these shifts can do, gradually over time, is reduce the daily inflammatory load your cardiovascular system is being asked to manage. Less oxidative stress reaching your arterial walls. Less chronic irritation of the endothelium. A quieter, calmer environment inside the vessels that carry blood to and from your heart every single minute of every day. That's not a miracle. That's biology responding to a reduced burden. And over months and years, that response is real and it's measurable. If you've stayed with this video all the way to this point, do this for me right now. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, what oil do you cook with most often at home? I want to know, because what I hear from this community always shapes what I cover next. There's one more thing I want to leave you with, and it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. We tend to think about heart disease as something that happens to people, a sudden event, a diagnosis that arrives from outside, something that happens because of genetics or bad luck, or a few dramatic choices. But the research increasingly points to something quieter and more gradual. Heart disease builds. It accumulates. It's the product of thousands of small decisions, repeated over decades, compounding silently in the background of ordinary life. Richard, cooking his vegetable oil every morning for 30 years, wasn't making a dramatic choice. He was making a small one, every day, and those small choices, stacked on top of each other, created a biological reality that eventually showed up in a cardiologist's office. The reason this matters, the reason it's worth understanding at this level of detail, is that small choices can also move in the other direction. Every morning you make a different decision in that kitchen is a morning you're giving your arteries a slightly lighter load to carry. Not a cure, not a reversal of everything, but a reduction, a shift in the direction of less inflammation, less oxidative stress, less of the daily damage that accumulates in silence. If what you heard today felt important to you, share this with someone you care about. With that person in your life who has been cooking with the same bottle of vegetable oil for years without ever questioning it. The information in this video could genuinely change how they think about something they do every single day. Subscribe so you don't miss what we're covering next, because the conversation we started today isn't finished. Your heart doesn't age overnight. It responds quietly and continuously to what you put in the pan every single morning. And now you understand why that matters more than most people ever told you.